Hey, good stuff from Mike Gundy yesterday, regardless of whether you agree or not. And, that's the thing. We all have opinions. He had a strong take yesterday. He's had a couple players transfer and, that's going on around the country. And there's kind of a generational clash going on, I think, now, particularly in sports. Nick Saban coaches hard. A lot of coaches do. Nick Saban, I think, can coach hard because his record of success is so great that people buy in and don't question what he coaches and the way he coaches and what he wants done. I think at some other schools, you have coaches sometimes that aren't as accomplished. I think players question it. Is this guy, really know what he's talking about? And I think it's going to come a time, we're going to see it here in the future, where you're going to have a team somewhere along the line that's going to refuse to play a game because something's going to happen, whether the coach got hard on a player or they didn't like what they had for dinner, or there's going to come something that a team is going to say, we're going to protest, we're not going to play the game. And I think it's going to happen in the near future. Just think that's where we're headed. But anyway, Mike Gundy yesterday, James has got his comments ready. This is what he had to say when he was asked about transfers and some of the players' mentality these days.
Well, I think we live in a world where people are non-committal. We allow liberalism to say, hey, I could just do what I want and I don't have to really be tough and fight through it. And you see that with young people because it's an option they're given. We weren't given that option when we were growing up. We were told what to do. We did it the right way, or you go figure it out on your own. In the world today, there's a lot of entitlement. I'm a firm believer in the Snowflake. I think it's setting there. And I'm not talking about Tabo. Tabo and I have had multiple good talks. I'm talking about every millennial young person, Generation Z, I think is what they call them. That's the world we live in, because if they say, well, it's a little bit hard, then we say, okay, well, let's go try something else. Versus, hey, let's bear down and let's fight through this. So you see a lot of that nowadays. And that doesn't have anything to do with Tabo or McCleskey or anybody that's been on the portal here. That's just in general in society. Even if you're working down here at Walmart, if your boss gets after you and tells you that you're not doing a good job, you may go home and cry and tell your mom, and your mom may say it's okay. And it's just kind of the facts of life, the world we live in today. Don't get me on politics.
Wow. Okay. Bud Light Hotline 205-342-9904. If you've got some thoughts on what Gundy had to say, whether you agree or don't agree. All right, we're going to sound off on it here. We'll start with me. I'm 54. Mike Gundy once famously proclaimed, "I'm a man. I'm 40." Well, I'm 54, and Gundy now is 50 himself. So, I agree with most of what he said. And for me, it's not a political thing. It's just a culture thing. I mean, I've been in the television business for a long time. In broadcasting. When I was breaking in my late teens, when I was told to do something, I wanted opportunity, I did it. I mean, if they called me at home or they called me and I was shooting basketball and they said, hey, can you come in and shoot something? I did it. I can't tell you how many times early in my career, even as I got into my 20s and was established, if I might be playing golf and news director might call and say, hey, we need somebody to fill in here. I did it. Didn't question it. Didn't feel like I could. Wanted to keep my job. Worked ungodly hours and crazy schedules, not for a lot of money either. But that's the way it was. And that was the culture at the time. And if you wanted to stay in the broadcasting business, you made sacrifices to do it. And a lot of people got weeded out because they didn't want to do it. And I'm not rich or famous or anything like that, but I have carved out a career, 36 years doing this because I was willing to make those sacrifices. Some people aren't, but it was more, playing sports in high school, same thing. Funny story. I mean, I hate to admit this one, but it's true. And I was mad about it, but that's the way it was. I, basketball practice my senior year of high school. I was a backup point guard and I thought I should be playing more. And the head coach was a former college player. I didn't really like him. We didn't get along. I had to, as Mark Godfrey once described, when we had a media day over here, I had a little sauce in my game, and we were running a 3-on-2 drill, and I whipped a pass behind my back, and The coach said, Harris, you do that one more time, you're out of here. Well, next time down, I did some little tricky, flavorful pass, and that was it. I didn't get to finish in fact, how hardcore was this guy? The shoes that we were issued were Converse, not the old Chuck Taylors, but this was 1982, 81, 82. They were Converse All-Stars, and they were had the red star. Anyway. The next day, I see him in the hall, and he's like, "Where are my shoes?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I want those shoes back. They're not your shoes. You were wearing them as long as you were on the team. I had to bring my shoes back that I had worn for half a season and turn them back in." But you know what? I didn't like it, but that's the way it was. He was the coach. I was the player. So I was off the team. And John Merrill, who I played high school basketball with, the Secretary of State now, he'll back that story up. But anyway, so players have not always agreed with coaches, but coaches had the final say. Now I'm not sure that players think coaches have the final say. I think if something happens that a player doesn't like, they feel like they can go complain to somebody else, whether it's in college, whether it would be the university president or the athletic director. Players feel like they can affect change, and the coach doesn't have the final say. I do think there's a sense of entitlement. I do think, and we're going to get you guys to weigh in. We'll do it after the break because we need to get our final break. But Trey is my intern. I will tell Trey this. I'm easier on interns than I used to be. I've changed over the years because, again, I don't want to be perceived as somebody who pushes people to do too much and more than they feel like they can do. So I'm much more. So I've adjusted because that's what you do in society. You adjust to the way things are, not the way that they used to be. And a lot of what Mike Gundy says, I agree with. We'll get James and we'll get Trey's thoughts on it when we come back on the other side of the break. Mike Gundy says we're creating a generation of snowflakes. We'll continue on this topic next here on the Gary Harris Show. We heard the comments from Mike Gundy, Oklahoma State head coach, saying that, players just push back. If they don't get their way, they don't want to fight through it. It's the culture that we've created. All right, I said for the most part, I agree with his comments. Maybe not all of them, but I do think that it's easy to say no. It's easy to say I won't. It's easy to say I can't. And those terms are now accepted. I'm not sure they were always accepted. James is right kind of in between me and Trey. James is in his 30s. What do you think of his comments?
I think he's right on it, but I see a lot of coaches that could use that same type of talk when it comes to commitment. I mean, just even go back into recent Alabama football history when it comes to Dennis Franchione encouraging and having a theme for the 2002 team and really the program about holding the rope, and then right after the Hawaii game, as far as officially leaving for Texas A&M without telling his players. So I don't think it's just exclusive to the players, if you ask me. But as far as the overall message, I think there's a lot of merit to what he said. But I also go back, though, to I think it was a couple of years ago when Wimp and Barry had Frank Martin on this very radio station, day of an Alabama-South Carolina basketball game here in Tuscaloosa, when Frank Martin discussed himself as a teenager, as far as being a part of, I think it was his high school basketball team back down in the Miami area, as far as how his coaches, the adults in his life, as far as his involvement in high school basketball, making sure he did the things that he needed to do, as far as whether it was lifting weights or any other sort of thing, in Frank Martin conveying as far as the overall thoughts, as far as the younger generation coming up, that maybe it's not the kids, it's the adults, as far as not making sure that the succeeding generations learn the lessons and do the things that they need to do to continue the traditions, especially that this country was built on.
Good take. All right, Trey is 19, so he really is he's in the Generation Z or millennials, whatever we call them. He's in that group that Mike Gundy is talking about. Do you agree with the coach?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like, being from South Carolina, I grew up in a household that felt definitely one way politically, and I'm not going to get into politics, but I think he made a good point about where things are going politically. and how kids are treated versus how kids were treated back in the day. It's a weird time to discuss this. I'm saying a weird time as in 2018 specifically because of what's happened recently at Maryland, and that was an extreme example of a coach not handling players correctly. But I think if you're any college athlete and you get the opportunity to play at any school, especially on the Power 5 level at Oklahoma State, to almost unappreciate that opportunity and act like you're entitled to a better spot somewhere else is pretty ridiculous.
Let me stop you on one thing you said, because that is the narrative. The narrative is that DJ Durkin mishandled that situation at Maryland, but they did a 2-month investigation and said that he didn't mishandle it, that he didn't do, he wasn't responsible for what those trainers and strength coaches and folks did when the young man passed away, and was reinstated. And then immediately, because of the threats from campus students and players and people around the community, he was removed as head coach. So, there's two different ways to look at that. I don't know. I'm just saying that after a 2-month investigation, he was reinstated as the head coach and then removed. So that could be an example of the mob mentality overrunning what was an investigation that said that he didn't do anything wrong. Now, I'm not arguing that he lost his team. I'm not saying that isn't the case, but I did find it interesting that after a 2-month investigation, he was reinstated as the head coach.
Well, and I'm not saying that situation is on him, but I'm just saying with that situation happening recently, a lot of people are worried about this and that, player safety, and I'm saying maybe necessarily programs being a little bit too intense. But nonetheless, I think that any kid that's going to transfer from one of these schools when they're given an opportunity like that is out of their mind.
Well, yeah. It's so you're a little more conservative in your thinking than a lot of 19-year-olds would be, because a lot of them would say, hey, the player's got a right to do whatever they want to do. And they do have the right to transfer. But I think the point that Gundy is making is that the first time that kids now have adversity, they just throw up their hands and say, I'll go somewhere else. All of them aren't willing to fight through. And that's more the line I'm taking, James, is that, we're in a society now where you can say no, or as I said, you can say I won't, or you can say I can't. And that's accepted. I'm not sure that when I was growing up that those terms were accepted. If you said I won't, I can't, or I don't know how, or I don't want to do it, you didn't always have a choice. Let me ask you that. I think you have a choice.
How many times were you told no over anything growing up?
A lot.
How many times do you think now that, as far as when I was growing up, to Trey's age and to a lot of our interns' age, that they're told no?
Not as often, I think.
That's your source of your problem.
And I agree. And it's a different culture. So you can't really...
I think now it comes to where, as far as even just with my dealings with our interns, is that you have to get not only professional, but a certain level of personal trust. And if you're able to do that, I think they are willing to do more, to go the extra mile for you out there.
But
it's a lot different, as you mentioned, though, just for the fact, I think it is detrimental from this aspect that a lot of boys and girls growing up, and this is where the adults come in, that have largely, not every parent, not every mom and dad, but a fair share of them have failed in telling their son or their daughter the meaning and the impact of two simple letters, N-O.
I agree with that. I think that's a good, but I think you're right too. I think I have a good group of interns at the television station, and Trey's one of them. And I think if you show them why you want them to do what you need them to do, and you give them a reason for it, I think they'll, for the most part, do what they're asked to do. I think those days are gone, though. You're right, where you just say, do it. Why? Like, parents used to say, hey, you need to do this. Why? Because I say so. That doesn't fly anymore. You're right. Those days don't. Do it because I say so doesn't fly anymore. And you have to give them a reason to do it. So it's a weird world, and then college athletics is right in the middle of it. Because, again, you got coaches, some of whom grew up in a system like we're talking about, where you did what you were told to do and you didn't question it. Now coaching kids and having to evolve away real quickly, because we got to get to the break, Trey.
Well, I just want to say thank goodness for guys like Jalen Hurts that had all the reasons in the world to transfer and stuck around, for my generation at least, because he shows that there's still people out there that do want to stick with it like he had.
All right, yeah, Jalen Hurts, he could have left and he didn't.